Okay, so this unit I'm going to put in two things we're going to learn. So the first one is complex numbers, the first half, and then the second half of the unit is called polar coordinates. Yeah. Okay, so this I in math stands for imaginary number. And what does it represent? It represents the square root of -1, an I. Because we all know you can't square root a negative number, so that's why it's called an imaginary number. You've probably heard before we've talked about x could be all real numbers. That's why we're always putting that, because now there's real and there's imaginary numbers in math. So now because this doesn't exist, it's imaginary.
Why do I need to know that? Who decided one day, hey guys, let's make
an imaginary number that doesn't actually exist. Right.
What does that help us solve?
Yeah.
If anything?
Maybe
I guess it's what you know, but...
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we'll do a little box over here. If you want, you can do this. So the I equals the square root of -1. So what would I squared equal? -1, because you square that. Then what would I cubed equal? So you have to take this times this. So -1 times an I. So what would I to the 4th equal? So for me, I would take I squared and another I squared. So +1. Then once you get to I5th, that pattern just would repeat again. So I5th would be I6th would be -1, the pattern would repeat. When I do this work, I basically always try to dial in at that one. I squareds. I like everything with I squareds kind of thing. Okay. So this simplification just basically says I can put numbers with numbers. So 16 minus 5 I can put together. So that's 11. And those i's and those i's I can put together. So plus 9i. Number 2, I will have to be careful here just to distribute this bracket. So I'm going to rewrite the last part of this plus, oops, not for I, plus 4, there's a plus 4 and then negative, so plus 5i. So that's the bracket part, right? Now I'm going to collect. So 13 plus 9i. And usually when you write a statement, they usually want your real part first and your imaginary part second. Not a big deal if you had it the other way around, but... Okay, so number 3, we have a 6 times an I squared. And what did we say I squared was? -1. So that's -6. Okay, next we're going to have to do a multiplication like that. So this first part is 10i squared. Then the next would be plus 14i. And what is I squared? I squared is -1. So this would be -10 plus 14i. Okay, there's nothing you can do about just an I. There's nothing lower you can go to. Okay, squaring something, try not to cheat and shortcut yourself here. When you square something, you're going to want to repeat it and FOIL it all. Okay, so squaring a binomial, that's what you're going to do. Okay, ready? First makes 4i squared. Outsides -6i. Insides are -6i. Last is +9. Then I know the I squared is -1. So that's a -4. Okay, so I'm going to go -4 plus 9. That can go together. Are we good with that? That's a 5. And then I can put those together. Minus 12i. Okay, now we get into this stuff. Okay, so I told you my strategy is to go with I squareds, no matter what I'm trying to do. If you like working with all of those, that's okay as well. So I'm going to go like this. I squared to the what would get me to an I 80. Do you remember the rules with exponents? They would multiply. So if I did that, are we okay to see that that's I to the 80? Okay, so I squared is -1. So what do you get mathematically if you do that? 40 times. So basically, what do you think? Is it positive or -1? Positive 1. Okay. 19 is not even. So I'm not going to get to a 19. The closest I'm going to get is an 18. So can you get me a number here just to get me to 18? So what's 2 times 9? So that's 18 times another I. Now do you see how I'm repeating 19 I's? Okay, now I squared is -1. So -1 to the 9th, and then another I yet. Okay, -1 to an odd number. So that's -1, and then I still have an I. And I'm sure some of you just wrote it like that. Okay, 21. So that is not going to work with I squareds, but I'm going to get close to 21. So I'm going to go to a 20. So there's 20 I's and another I. So do you see I'm at 21? So -1 to the 10th. So -1 repeated 10 times will make +1 and then an I. So this answer is just I. Okay, I cubed, well this was actually one of our originals here, but so that would be an I squared times another I, which means -1 for the I squared gets replaced with a -1. So this would be -I. Okay, and that's one of the original ones we had, right, in our box up there. Okay, now this one, this is a coefficient. So you're going to have to think about it as a -1 to the 15th and an I to the 15th, because you have to think about your coefficient doing that as well. That gets repeated 15 times as well as the I. Okay, so this would end up being, when it's all said and done, that's a -1. How many I squareds can we get out of that? Did you go with 7 and 1 more, like that, to make the 14 and 1, 15? Okay, so I had the -1 from the coefficient stuff. -1 to the 7th. So what do we have here for the number? So this is negative and negative. So that would turn positive. Okay, last one, so coefficient part, the I part. So I'm going to have a 2 cubed, an I cubed. I'm going to have a -1/9 and an I 9th. Right, because everything gets cubed, so you're still going to have to cube the 2 in the front. Okay, can you tell me what this makes together? 2 cubed, we got an 8. And then this is -1. So -8 on that part. And how many I's do I have when I put those together? Do you remember the rule of the exponents on that? So now you would add them, right? Okay, now I'm going to go I squareds. I always try to get I squareds, everything back to that. So I squared to the 6th. Okay, always replace the I squared with -1. So this part turns out positive 1. Right, are we okay? That's positive 1. So my final answer is just -8. Okay, rationalize the bottom. Do you remember the word conjugate when you rationalize something? So the conjugate would be 2 plus 4i. So you've done rationalizing skills with radicals. Okay, on the top you're going to have to FOIL that, by the way. But what's special about foiling conjugates? If you do them properly, what would happen? Do you remember? You get to flow them instead. Okay, so here we go. 6 plus 12i, 2i, 4i squared. On the bottom, 4 minus 16i squared. Okay, now don't forget that I squared is -1. Okay, so I'm going to put this together on the top. I have a 6, and are you okay if I do this? -4. You see where I'm getting a -4 from? Or do you want me to write it out? That's -4 now. So 2 plus 14i. And then this would turn into 4 plus 16. So that would become 20. And I guess if I say simplify, we would be able to even go further with that with a reduction, right? If I divide it all by 2, it would look like that. Okay, what does the back of your notes booklet look like if I add something, like the very, very back? Oh, it's still notes. Do you have a little bit of room, like on a side? Okay, what if I gave you something like that? So, do you remember this skill you learned in grade 10 and we did it in grade 11 where you do a times 2 roots to get that? So, would this make sense to you? I could break that down like that. Right? That's the same as a -81. Then, root 81 is 9, and root -1 is I. What if I did this? So I'm going to go root 125 and root -1. Okay, the square root of 125, that's not something that works. Do you remember breaking this down more? So which special square would divide? So 25 times 5. And then that part's an I over there. So the full simplification would be 5 root 5i. Okay, so this is something you've done. Now we're just adding the I part onto it. Okay. And then this is the last one you might run into. What happens to this? Do you remember what happens when you have the same square root with the same square root? It just does what to the math? It drops the square root, right? So in other words, you can think about it like this, because you're repeating it twice. So what does it do? It drops that. Okay, and I feel like I didn't put a lot of that in your practice, but I did throw it onto your test. I do know that it was more into some review that I saw, so you will run into it somewhere, but I'm not sure into your practice or not.